It began with a discovery no one expected. On September 22, 2023, investigators unearthed the remains of a woman who had vanished without a trace more than 3 years earlier. Her name was Elena Cross, a 49-year-old mother of 2 whose disappearance had haunted a quiet Colorado town since the spring of 2020. The discovery brought back to life one of the most perplexing and controversial cases in recent memory. For years, suspicion had hovered over Elena's husband, Richard Cross, a man who, on the surface, appeared to be a devoted father and a successful businessman. But behind the smiles and the polished reputation, investigators believed Richard was hiding a much darker truth. When Elena first vanished, her family refused to believe she would walk away voluntarily. She had children she adored, a tight circle of friends, and plans for the future. Yet from the very beginning, the details of her husband's story never seemed to add up. Detectives and forensic experts poured thousands of hours into the case. They issued more than 100 search warrants, interviewed over 400 witnesses, and tracked Richard's every movement in the days leading up to her wife's disappearance. And eventually, they charged him with her murder. But then, in an astonishing twist, the charges were dropped. The evidence against him was deemed too weak, too circumstantial. Still, most people believed Richard had escaped justice until September of 2023, when Elena's body was found more than 50 miles away from the original search area. Alongside her remains, investigators also uncovered traces of DNA. What they found would complicate everything and raise the chilling possibility that Elena might not have been Richard's only victim. Elena Cross had been born on April 11, 1971, to her parents Michael and Carolyn Hayes. She grew up in Indiana with her 2 brothers, Thomas and Stephen. To everyone who knew her, Elena was warm, intelligent, and endlessly compassionate. She had a gift for making people feel heard. In her younger years, she dreamed of becoming a teacher, and she worked tirelessly to achieve that goal. In high school, she met Richard Cross. He was charismatic, athletic, and ambitious. The 2 dated for several years before marrying in their mid-20s. Richard had once dreamed of a career in professional sports, but turned instead to the landscaping business after an injury derailed his ambitions. Elena, meanwhile, devoted herself to teaching. Together they built what seemed like a picture-perfect life. They had 2 daughters, Madeline and Grace, and eventually moved from Indiana to Colorado for what they hoped would be a fresh start. By 2018, Richard's landscaping company was doing well, and Elena had retired from teaching. On the outside, the family looked like the embodiment of success. They lived on a sprawling 7-acre property with mountain views, and Richard even served as a volunteer firefighter. Elena threw herself into her church and into new hobbies like mountain biking. But appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the polished surface, cracks were forming. Friends noticed that Elena often looked tired and withdrawn. She had survived cancer twice, a battle that left her stronger in some ways, but more vulnerable in others. She wanted peace, stability, and love. What she felt instead was tension, a growing distance from the man she had once trusted with everything. And on Mother's Day, May 10, 2020, Elena's world shattered. She vanished without a trace. Detectives immediately expanded their timeline. Every single detail of what happened on May 9th and 10th, 2020, became critical. Investigators went through Daniel's phone and truck data, and what they discovered was alarming. On the afternoon of May 9th, his phone showed erratic movements around the property. When questioned, Daniel casually claimed he had been hunting chipmunks with tranquilizers, something he supposedly did often. But when pressed, the explanation didn't add up. Why would someone need to switch their phone to airplane mode for nearly 8 hours straight, from late afternoon into well into the night, if they were only outside on their own property? Later, investigators discovered that Daniel's truck had been moved multiple times that evening. Around 9:30 p.m., long after he claimed he was asleep with Sarah, his truck backed out of the driveway and moved almost 100 feet before stopping again. Theories began swirling. Was he moving something? Or someone? Even stranger, between 3:25 a.m. and 3:48 a.m., Daniel's truck door was opened and shut over 80 times. That detail haunted detectives. Who does that in the middle of the night unless they're trying to hide evidence, loading items, or cleaning obsessively? But it wasn't just the timeline that unraveled his story. Surveillance cameras in the nearby town of Ridgeway caught Daniel the next morning, May 10th, tossing several trash bags into random bins outside fast food chains and hotels. When investigators asked him about it, Daniel gave an almost laughable explanation. He claimed he didn't want to pay landfill fees for throwing things away. Police would later describe his answers as convenient but unbelievable. And then came one of the most damning discoveries. A co-worker who met Daniel at a job site the following day reported a strong smell of bleach and chlorine in his hotel room. Piece by piece, the image of a man covering his tracks became clearer. But investigators still lacked the one thing they needed most: Sarah's body. That absence left room for doubt, and Daniel's defense would seize upon it later. Still, when detectives dug deeper into Sarah's personal life, they uncovered an entirely new motive, one that painted Daniel in an even darker light. Sarah's private notes on her phone revealed a woman who felt trapped in her marriage. She documented incidents of verbal abuse, her husband's drinking, and how she feared being alone with him. She even wrote that Daniel would never allow her to divorce him, that he would rather destroy everything than let her go. Then came the revelation of an affair. Sarah had reconnected with an old classmate, a man named Michael, whom she had secretly been speaking with for over a year. The two exchanged dozens of texts daily, and Sarah confided in him about her crumbling marriage. Just 2 days before she vanished, Sarah had written in her notes, "He accused me of having a boyfriend. He knows something." This, investigators believed, may have been the spark that ignited everything. The more investigators pieced things together, the clearer it became that Daniel Carter wasn't just unlucky. He was hiding something. On May 20th, 2020, police executed a full search warrant at the Carters' home. What they uncovered was staggering. Inside the dryer, the tiny cap of a tranquilizer dart, a piece that could only have come from a dart gun, was discovered lodged among the laundry. Investigators believe Daniel had used his tranquilizer rifle, normally meant for wildlife, on his wife. Then, in the couple's bedroom, they found a spent bullet casing, but no bullet hole in the wall, no visible damage anywhere. Had Daniel fired a shot inside the house? If so, what exactly had he been aiming at? And, perhaps most disturbing of all, burned scraps inside the fireplace. Investigators suspected they were the remnants of Sarah's personal journal, where she may have documented even more about her unhappy marriage. With growing circumstantial evidence, detectives believe Daniel had killed his wife sometime in the late afternoon of May 9th, the day before Mother's Day. They theorized that after an argument, he subdued her with a tranquilizer dart, possibly shot her, then used the cover of night to dispose of her body. By early June, the media had caught wind of the case. The once charming husband, who had filmed a plea video begging for Sarah's safe return, was now under the microscope. His crocodile tears and nervous delivery made the public suspicious. For nearly a year, the case built momentum. On May 5, 2021, Daniel was finally arrested. Prosecutors charged him with first-degree murder of his wife, tampering with physical evidence, illegal possession of a dangerous weapon, attempting to influence a public servant. To the outside world, the evidence seemed overwhelming. Surveillance footage of trash bags, cell phone data showing his suspicious movements, bleach smells in his hotel room, and Sarah's damning notes about her unhappy marriage. But Daniel had something on his side: no body and no direct forensic proof tying him to Sarah's disappearance. His defense attorneys went on the attack. They claimed the tranquilizer dart cap was planted. They said the bullet casing meant nothing. It could have been years old. And most significantly, they pointed to DNA evidence. Inside Sarah's SUV, and even on her bike helmet, investigators found partial DNA belonging to an unknown male. That same DNA matched records from unsolved sexual assault cases in 2 different states. This was explosive. Suddenly, the defense had an alternative theory. Sarah may have fallen victim to a serial predator, not her husband. And the biggest blow? Prosecutors had sat on this DNA evidence for months. They hadn't informed the defense until the very last minute, a mistake that would haunt their case. By early summer 2021, the case was cracking. Without Sarah's body, with conflicting evidence, and with the prosecution accused of withholding key information, doubts grew. Finally, in September 2021, just days before the trial was to begin, prosecutors dropped all charges without prejudice. That meant they could refile later if stronger evidence emerged, but for now, Daniel walked free. And he walked out of court smiling, flanked by his 2 daughters, who stood by his father despite the mountain of suspicion. But the story was far from over. 2 years later, in September 2023, investigators made a chilling discovery. In a remote area nearly 50 miles from the Carters' home, a shallow grave was unearthed. Inside were human remains. Dental records and a chemotherapy implant confirmed the unthinkable. It was Sarah Carter. Her body had been lying there, hidden in the wilderness, all this time. When Sarah Carter's body was identified in September 2023, it sent shockwaves across the community. After more than 3 years of unanswered questions, her family finally had confirmation of what they had feared all along. Sarah was gone, and it was no accident. The grave had been shallow, almost hastily dug. The medical examiner reported that Sarah's remains showed signs consistent with blunt force trauma. But after years in the Colorado wilderness, the evidence was too degraded to give a clear cause of death. That ambiguity gave Daniel's defense just enough ground to breathe, but the public suspicion returned with full force. The FBI quietly reopened their investigation. Detectives revisited Daniel's movements on the night Sarah vanished. They retraced his suspicious trip to the hotel, the trash bags in his car, and his late-night drive into the foothills. The burial site was roughly in the same direction. Was it coincidence or a trail left behind? Sarah's family, who had always believed Daniel was guilty, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against him. The civil case painted him as a manipulative husband who thought he could outsmart not only the police but the FBI. His daughters, however, stood firmly by his side, insisting their father was innocent, that their mother had been stalked by someone else. Meanwhile, prosecutors faced a nightmare. They had already fumbled once, withholding evidence, bungling the DNA findings, and dropping charges. If they refiled now, they'd have to prove their case beyond doubt, with a body that only raised more questions. And then came the bombshell. Forensic genealogists were able to track the unknown male DNA found in Sarah's car. It matched a man already in custody for violent crimes in another state. He had no known connection to Daniel, but his profile fit the picture of a roaming predator. Suddenly, the story split into two terrifying possibilities. Had Daniel, the husband with everything to lose, staged an elaborate cover-up? Tranquilizers, bleach, a secret burial? Or had Sarah, already vulnerable and fearful in her own marriage, become the victim of a stranger who had been watching her? Even today, years after Sarah's body was laid to rest, the truth remains elusive. Daniel Carter lives quietly, always under suspicion, but never convicted. Sarah's family continues their legal battles, desperate for closure. And investigators keep one file permanently open, because somewhere inside it may still lie the answer to the mystery of who really killed Sarah Carter.